Hi guys, and welcome to A Beginner's Guide to Modding Skyrim, Part 8. The theme for this video is going to be immersion. We are going to be looking at mods that make the world of Skyrim feel a lot more real. But not just the land of Skyrim itself, the people as well. We're going to be using some mods that make them behave a little bit more believably. And the first mod we're going to look at is called Wet and Cold. And basically the mod actually does pretty much what it says. It makes Skyrim feel either wet or cold depending on where you are and what you've been doing. For example, if you have been out in the rain or swimming and you get onto dry land, you will start dripping. There will be water dripping off you. And if you walk around, your footsteps will sound kind of squishy. You will sound like you've got water in your boots. If it is snowy, your clothes will have a slight frosty, snowy look to them, as if they have had snow falling on them. If you stare directly into a snowstorm, you will find yourself getting blind, and if you look up at the sky when it's raining, you may get raindrops in your eyes, which will cause you to sort of blur up, to tear up briefly, which really does give an amazing sense of immersion. And one of my favourite features with this mod is that you can see your breath if it is cold. So if you're just breathing lightly, you can actually see the breath coming out of your nose and mouth, and if you're talking, you can actually see a lot of breath coming out. This works for NPCs and even things like horses. And things like this might sound quite minor, but it has a fairly large impact on how realistic a scene feels. I mean, when it's cold and you can see someone's breath coming out of their mouth, it feels colder. It just looks like it's a cold day. But the mod also changes the way the NPCs react to the weather. So when it's wet, for example, they will tend to go indoors. They will tend to go home. There are some exceptions. You can set it so that workers continue to work. But for example, they will try and put up hoods to avoid the rain. If you have Cloaks of Skyrim installed, they may try to put on a rain cloak and avoid the rain that way. And there's even an option to have NPCs put up umbrellas. You can disable it if you don't like that option. When it is very cold, the NPCs will do the same thing. They will try and get inside to warm up, or if they have to be outside, they will put up fur hoods. Perhaps they'll put on big, thick fur cloaks if you're using another mod called Winter is Coming, which adds the sort of cloaks you see in programs like Game of Thrones. And in general, the NPCs just behave more as you would expect from people who happen to be wet and cold. And that in turn makes Skyrim feel just that little bit more real. Now, wet and cold is very customizable. You can change a lot of the settings in the mod configuration menu. I'll go along to wet and cold. So I can go along to the wet option. I can enable or disable drips, soggy feet, or even steaming. If you get wet in a warm area, you will actually steam when you come out. What the rain does when you look up at it, you can enable different gear. Obviously, I need the rain gear enabled. One thing I can tell you about this is when you enable rain gear, you can't continue without, first of all, just moving the cursor up one and then back down again. All races or no Argonians. So, for example, now all the races will put up hoods, cloaks, including my followers, but Argonians will ignore it because, of course, they don't mind the rain. And of course, if you want umbrellas, just enable it. Cold, very similar. You can enable the cold gear for all races, or no Nords between 6 AM and 6 PM. You know, when the sun is out, the Nords don't need cold gear. They're tough. You can decide which gear they will wear. You can decide things like the breath, whether you look snowy, and so on. It's all very easy to customize and set exactly as you want it. There is also a tab for ashes. This is only enabled if you have another mod that is called, I believe it's called Wet and Cold Ashes, and is the Solstheim equivalent of Wet and Cold. It adds dust storm effect, so your eyes blur, you find it very hard to see when there's a dust storm. I'm not going to show you that mod in this video. You can try it out for yourself if you like. But once you've installed that mod, you get some options here. And you can even change things like heat detection and shelter detection. I suggest you leave those on. What those do are if an NPC is in a cold area and he's got the cold breath, but he goes near to a fire, to a warm area, I believe it stops him from having the hot breath, which is obviously a lot more realistic. And if you are having any issues, you can select the restart option and it will restart the whole mod. This is kind of useful if you're doing something like disabling umbrellas because you've decided you don't like them, but some of the NPCs have already got the umbrellas out. The only way they will put them away is if you quickly restart. Once you've selected this, once you exit the menu, it will restart the quest and everything will be set to whatever it is you've just set. So if you've turned umbrellas off, all the umbrellas will disappear. The second mod I'm going to show you actually adds something that is missing from the vanilla game, and you may not have actually noticed it. When you're running around Skyrim in the snow, have you ever noticed you don't leave footprints behind? Well, from now on you will notice it because I've just mentioned it, but don't worry, there is a mod that actually adds footprints to Skyrim. It adds them for the player, for NPCs, for many creatures, and your horse. And it's not just footprints it leaves behind, it actually adds a sort of powdery impact when you step. You can see the snow sort of being lifted into the air as you hit it with your foot. And this is one of those tiny little things that when you see it in action, you realise it really does make the snow feel a lot more like snow. This is one of those mods that you install and almost immediately forget you've installed because it's so natural, because it feels so right. You just feel that's how the game always should have been. In fact, you only notice it if you uninstall it because suddenly everything looks wrong. And the same is true of the third mod that I'm going to show you, and that mod is a splash of rain. And it does something very similar to footprints. It adds something to the game that should have been there, that is missing, and that is splashes of rain. When it's raining, with this mod, you will actually see water splash on the ground and on surfaces, and it is such a tiny detail, and yet it adds so much to the realism and to the immersion factor of the game. This mod also adds ambient sound when you're inside, if it is raining outside, so you can actually hear the sound of rain on the roof, on the windows, and that is a lovely little atmospheric touch. The Splash of Rain mod can also be customised a little from the mod configuration menu. I go along to Splash of Rain. You can change the level of the splash. So if I go to 4, it will actually have the heaviest amount of splash. As it says down here, the mod needs to be restarted to take effect, and this will automatically be selected when you change this. So if I leave now, it'll restart Splash of Rain, and in a few seconds the splashes will start again, and this time they should be a little heavier. As you also, there you go, you can see the splashing now. As you also noticed, there was another setting which was the volume for the interior sound, the rain on the roof and the windows, so you can change that as well. All three of these mods, along with the supported mods such as Cloaks of Skyrim and Winter is Coming, are must-have mods for me. They really do make Skyrim come alive. The obvious question for some people is going to be, is there a performance hit? And I would probably say there should be, although I've never actually noticed any. I can't detect any difference when using these mods. However, I'm guessing if your system is weaker, there may be some effect, but it is not large, and it is well worth trying these mods out. They really are on my must-have list of mods. So let's get these mods installed, and all of them are available on the Nexus site. So first of all, I'm going to go and download the actual files I need. So Wet and Cold, all I really need is the main file. It's currently at version 1.31, but whichever the latest version is, you're going to need that. So download with Manager on that. I highly recommend the Cloaks of Skyrim mod and the Winter is Coming mod. So I'm going to download the latest version of Cloaks of Skyrim with Download with Manager. And I'm also going to take the optional file for Dawnguard. And of course, for Winter is Coming, take the latest version. I'm going to choose the NMM install version. So Download with Manager on that. Next, the Footprints mod. I'm going to take the main file, Download with Manager on that one, and also the optional file for Solstheim. This allows you to have footprints in the ash of Solstheim. So if you have got the Dragonborn DLC, you probably want this as well. And finally, Splash of Rain, Download with Manager on the main file. And whilst those files are downloaded, I would just like to point out that Wet and Cold does require SKSE for some of the functions. So if you want the full functionality, you're going to need SKSE. And obviously, to use the MCM for Wet and Cold and Splash of Rain, you need the MCM system. You need the mod configuration menu that comes with Sky UI. I did cover those in the second part of this series. Of course, I use those. I use SKSE, I use Sky UI and MCM, and I highly recommend them for everyone. So, once the files have all downloaded, I recommend installing the cloaks first. So I'm going to install Cloaks of Skyrim, and I'm also going to activate the Dawnguard patch as well. Again, select No, so it installs normally. Then I'm going to install Winter is Coming. And this is actually a little bit more involved. It has an options menu that allows you to pick certain settings. Now, my recommendation is to use the main plugin. This gives the cloaks to vendors, it allows you to craft the cloaks, and it places the cloaks in-game. However, if you don't want that, if you want it, for example, only for crafting, so you won't find them on NPCs, you won't find them on vendors, you can choose the craft only plugin, or you can choose the no guards plugin. This is essentially the same as the main one, except no guards will have the cloaks. Now, it actually doesn't matter which of these you pick from the point of view of whether or not the people of Skyrim will wear these cloaks, because Wet and Cold will detect any of these three plugins, and if it is cold, it will give these cloaks to the population. It will give them to certain NPCs who meet the right criteria. So even if you have craft only, you will find certain NPCs wearing the cloaks anyway. So completely up to you. Generally, I would recommend the main plugin. Now, it's asking me, well, it's actually saying to me that this Cloaks of Skyrim is installed, and it wants to know, am I using the main Cloaks patch, or am I using the No Imperial Cloaks version? I am using the main one. So I'm going to select that, and then it's done. And so now I'm going to install Wet and Cold. Just activate, and it's done. Very simple indeed, really. So Footsteps next. Go along to the Footsteps mod. Version 0.99 at the moment. I'm activate the main file, and then activate the Ash supplemental. Again, I'm going to select No, so it installs it normally. And Splash of Rain. There you go. Okay, so all 5 mods are now activated. There are a few more steps left to do. The first one is to edit one of your ini files. The ini file in question is the Skyrim.ini file, and you will find it in your Documents, My Games, Skyrim folder. So we're going to edit this. You can use Notepad if you want. I do recommend using Notepad++. If you haven't got that program, install it. It really is a lot more pleasant to use. And you're looking for a value called fdecal lifetime. Now, you may not actually have such a value. So if you go along to the Footprints mod and check about 2/3 of the way down, there is a section on the ini file edit, and it does tell you what you have got to add. And the line is fdecal lifetime equals 900. So you can right click and copy this, and you need to place it in the display section. So you can place it directly under display if you like. Now, when I opened Skyrim.ini, I did not have this value. My file looked like this, so I had to add it. If you have the value, search for it first. If you have the value, change that value instead. And you can place it anywhere underneath the display. As I said, if you already have this, just change it to 900. And what this is a value that decides how long decals last. So that's things like blood stains and footprints. 900, I believe this is in seconds, so that's about 15 minutes. I think the default's about 500. So it's not essential to do this. It just means that the footsteps last a little bit longer. And finally, I check my load order. I've used Boss to sort it automatically, and everything looks pretty much fine. The splash of rain is right at the top, but footprints, wet and cold, all fairly high up as well, followed by the cloak mods. If you have not yet seen my video regarding load order and the boss tool, now is the time to go and watch it. You are getting to the stage where understanding load order and being able to manipulate it is important. These mods, for example, do have some masters. It does require certain files to be loaded beforehand, and although Skyrim is a lot more robust on this issue, it is well worth knowing what you're doing. So, as I've said, if you have not watched my video on load order and boss yet, that should be your homework after this video. Okay guys, well that is about it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to take immersion to the next level. We're going to go a little bit more hardcore, and we're going to make Skyrim feel like a cold and harsh place to live. It will not be for the faint of heart, or for those lacking patience. You guys are, of course, more than welcome to join me for that video, and I look forward to seeing you there. And until then, as always, have fun.